And on behalf of Schools That Can, I'm delighted to welcome you to this fireside chat on the topic, the value of universities in changing times. I'm off camera today because this event has been designed to be a conversation without a moderator between two of the most respected university leaders in the nation, at a time when post-secondary education needs their wisdom. Consequently, we want to create a fireside chat atmosphere for Nancy and John talking to each other, being the only ones on the screen. Of course, I'm talking about Chancellor Nancy Cantor of Rutgers Newark University and Chancellor John King of State University of New York and prior Secretary of Education. Both need no introductions. They're truly among the most respected leaders in today's post-secondary space. To help provide a little structure, I've been asked to pose prompter questions within several tracks, which I will do. Our eminent conversationalists will converse in all the inspiring and informative ways this conversation will take us. I know they're looking forward to chatting with each other, and we're all in for a real treat. Feel free to comment in the chat. Time permitting, we will try to reserve time at the end to share audience questions with our speakers. I'll start our conversation with the first general question. What do you think is behind this? What do you think is behind what seems to be a growing skepticism of higher education? What are the stakes for economically disadvantaged students? Whoever would like to start.
I'm going to defer to Nancy to start.
Oh, great, John. So, I think in terms of the growing skepticism, that really the issue is that more and more families are feeling left out of the opportunity, that questions of access and affordability, questions of belonging, questions of, is that really a track for me? Worries about debt, worries about the way in which the selective competitive system might leave them and their children out. I think of, just as an example, and I know John would have many, and I'll be quiet in a minute, New Jersey had every year, the state of New Jersey graduates 6,000 undocumented high school students. Are we reaching those families and those students? I mean, that's just one example. John, I don't know, you're probably feeling the same in New York, I would think.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'd say amen to everything that you just said. And, I think two challenges that have exacerbated the problem that you described. One is just the ballooning student debt crisis, I think, has produced a real question for some families: is college worth it? Now, of course, the evidence is it is.
Right.
Make $1 million more over your career if you have that bachelor's degree. You look at, which young people are in good jobs that pay good wages with benefits, and it's the students who have degrees.
Right.
But when people look at those debt numbers, I think that shifts how they think about it. And part of that is for years, the federal government did not take an aggressive enough stance with respect to predatory for-profit colleges that continue to saddle students with debt. And we tried, certainly at the end of the Obama administration, we were trying to crack down, but then our successors went in the opposite direction, and the Biden administration is now again trying to crack down on that sector when they're taking advantage of students. The other issue is, I think there is something in our politics that is a skepticism of science, knowledge, and so you do see in some of the polling, depending on where you are in the political spectrum, increased skepticism of higher ed. And some of it is about, a feeling that higher ed is sort of ideologically monolithic. Some of that criticism may even be fair, but it's produced this really dangerous kind of partisan spirit around higher ed, which really worries me.
And I think, just bouncing off that, I think a lot of times people see higher ed as a kind of monastery on a hill, that that we really aren't part of our communities, for example.
Mhm,
And,
mhm.
as John knows, I mean, I and my colleagues have emphasized over and over, as he has, that we have to be anchor institutions in our community.
Mhm,
We've
mhm.
got this expansive talent pool in our own backyards, and we often ignore it. And part of making it feel like they belong is to start early, to do things
Yes,
in K-12, to really
yes.
smooth the pathway from community college to a four-year institution. I mean, when you talk
100%.
about keeping debt down, that's one way to keep debt down. And but people look at colleges and universities, especially our four-year, publics and privates, as sort of distanced, as kind of, out there for our own good. And I think we have to reconnect, as cliche as it sounds, we have to really reconnect with being for the public good.
100% agree with that. And I think there are some opportunities. One of the things that Governor Hochul has proposed in New York is a Empire Service Corps that would compensate students for time doing public service work in their community where their school is located. I think that would be a part of exactly what you're describing, kind of
Totally agree. I think that's a
getting together
great idea.
community. Yeah.
And, what we do a lot of, and people who work in the anchor institution field do a lot of, is really publicly engaged scholarship and community engaged
Yes.
curriculum.
Yes.
When I have students at Rutgers Newark who grow up in the Ironbound in Newark, grow up with the toxins of pollution and see climate change
Mhm, mhm,
firsthand, they do extraordinary research, and we
mhm.
really see the asset that they bring to the table, and they feel a part of it then.
That's right.
I mean, and when you talk about public service, I mean, we're then creating the next generation of change makers who feel like they have an obligation, if you will, to really engage the community.
Mhm, mhm.
And I think things are changing in that way. I think people are moving a little bit away from the sort of let me do my work away, and really thinking about the local as something that's important.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that is, I think, particularly true given, for example, the affirmative action rulings. So people are understanding now that, look, there's this expansive talent pool, but we have to look at it right here.
That's right. That's right. And we have to take the steps necessary to, with the tools available to us under the law, make sure that we are still advancing that diversity commitment. Our board adopted a resolution to say, we're going to look at first gen status, socioeconomic status, veterans, AmeriCorps alumni. We're using the College Board landscape tool to look at adversity that students have overcome in their geography or in their school, to say, we're going to use every tool to make sure that we are bringing those diverse students because our classrooms are better, our campuses are stronger, if we have that diversity.
Exactly. And, we have a lot of data out there. Scott Page did a fabulous book on the diversity bonus. In a knowledge economy,
Yes.
the collective intelligence of a diverse group is much
That's right.
stronger than when
That's
it's
right.
not diverse. And that's what we ought to be. We ought to see that as our mandate. And,
Yes.
and it's easy because the demography is right there. I mean,
That's right.
this is not hard to find. And the talent pool is such an asset. I mean, we do a very substantial prison education program in all the major prisons in New Jersey, and then a big reentry population. In our honors living learning community, our reentry students, formerly incarcerated students, are teaching everybody what it means to think about the school to prison pipeline, for example, or what it means, to think about what real equity would look like.
Yes. Yes. I have to say that like you, I'm sure I've attended many graduations, but the graduations for our SUNY higher ed and prison programs
Right.
are just so inspiring, just such a reminder
Yeah.
of the transformative power of
Exactly.
education. And we're trying to grow our higher ed and prison programs because I think it's one of the best things we can do to help
Absolutely.
folks change the direction of their lives, come home, be
Right.
more successful,
And
avoid
we'll spend less as a society.
That's right. That's right. That's
Um,
right.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that about the commencements, because this last fall did a commencement at the Edna Mahan Security Facility for Women.
Mm-hmm.
Extraordinarily scary place. And the senior theses that those women wrote were the best I have read in years, about trauma outside and trauma inside, and what does it mean? The life experience, we know that diverse life experience says it
Yes.
all. I mean,
Yes.
and that's one of the reasons that I'm a lot of people are jumping, and I understand why, but jumping on online education, fully online, and I get the reasoning, but I really hope that people understand the value of group work and the value of
Yes.
being in a diverse group environment, because it's unmatched. I mean,
Yes. Yes. And
yeah.
the relationships that you can form in a classroom, even thinking about the prison program, so often the faculty members will describe just what a transformative teaching experience it is.
Exactly.
And I think one of the gifts we can give our students is exposure to rich intellectual dialogue with faculty members and
Right.
with peers. And so I would say some of the online providers, I hope some of our online courses try to use the online environment to achieve that.
Absolutely.
But it's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard to get that genuine human connection as a
Yeah, and I'm not against at all, and we do online programming too, and it can be a useful tool for people who are working, and which any of our students are, but there is a trade-off that I think and one of the things that I think all the time about, I know you do too, John, is that we're in such a divisive moment in this landscape, and one of the things that higher ed can do is really teach people how to learn together.
Yeah.
And what that means, to get in the head of another person. I mean, I'm a social psychologist, so that speaks to me. But sorry for the noise in the background.
That's okay. Oh, you're so right. Oh, go ahead, Michael. We forgot there was
I just no surprise this conversation is taking such a stimulating direction. But allow me to spotlight certain tracks and specific questions, so we have a little bit more diverse questions. The first track has to do with student diversity, and the question is, how might the recent Supreme Court decision on affirmative action impact your university's student diversity?
Well, I think, we've sort of said it, both John said in terms of what SUNY is doing, in terms of what you're looking at. And from my perspective, again, this really goes back to understanding how to make connections locally. And local can be a broad swath of geography, but how to really think about, for example, dual enrollment programs that really introduce a diverse student body. If we're in an urban setting like we are, or in New York City, or you really want students to feel that they can be comfortable learning in a college environment. And the best thing to do is to think about things like dual enrollment, to think about the nature of what the opportunity is to recruit low-income students, but you got to understand the reality of their situation. I mean, we cannot have people who are worried about childcare, people who are worried about jobs, people who are worried about supporting families and giving back to families. We need to really understand food. I don't know if you're facing this, John, but we have a huge and wonderful sustainable food pantry, and it serves an enormous population, and is very important. So I think, you know, part of the notion of really encompassing diversity is to really understand the life circumstances of the
Yes.
talent pool that's there, and to
That's right.
really try to bring it in, and then to build curriculum that builds on their knowledge. You know, we during COVID, for example, the mayor asked if our students who speak so many home languages could do contact tracing in the city, because so many families need multilingual contact tracing. That is such an experience for students to bring their diverse lived experience. And
Yes.
I think, you know, I think we get sidetracked if we, and I did the Michigan affirmative action cases, so I am not in any way pulling back from the importance of that. But given the current ruling, I think it's extremely important for us to recognize the direct talent pool that's there, and to really
100%.
hold it up.
And look, I think that, you know, my fear is two things. One, I think a lot of Black, Latino, Indigenous young people heard in the Supreme Court's message, a message that they are not welcome in
Right.
higher education.
Right.
And so we've got to work doubly hard to make sure that students know that they are wanted,
Right.
that we want them on our campuses, in our institutions, and value them. The other thing I worry about is an inadequate institutional effort by some of our peer institutions.
Totally agree.
And the sad fact is they didn't use affirmative action well enough when they had it. You look at the
Absolutely.
numbers of Black and Latino students at the Ivy institutions, at some of the other elite institutions, they were inadequately using the tool before.
Right.
And the risk is now, if they don't hustle to
Right.
go find talent everywhere, that the numbers will go down and we will have fewer diverse folks
Right.
prepared for leadership roles in this country. And that would be a tragedy. And so I really do, you know, whenever I can, I try to implore our colleagues in the sector to put in the effort. People figure out, you know, at these institutions, if they want a left tackle,
Right, they're gonna find them.
they're gonna find them, right?
Right.
At the tiniest
Right.
school in the most remote place in the country, they find them. Well, we should be doing that across disciplines.
Absolutely.
You know, why is it that we have campuses around this country where you go in the math department or the engineering department, or the computer science department, and you don't see Black and Latino students? They're out there.
Absolutely.
Folks have to do the work to attract and retain those students.
Absolutely.
And we're committed to that at SUNY. I know that you're doing that in your work now at Rutgers. I know you'll continue that at Hunter. But I really want us as a community to keep pushing those particularly well-resourced institutions to put in the work to double, you know, many of them need to double their Pell population.
Absolutely. But, you know, part of that, as you well know, is that they really have to do what Gary Orfield has written about. They have to take down the walls around opportunity.
Yes, yes.
This is about new forms of financial aid, not merit aid. But this is about understanding how we have overvalued standardized tests that simply don't take into account what life has been before you get to take that test. This is about the schools that students are in, segregated by race and class,
Mhm.
that don't have the kind of college counseling, don't have the full pre-college curriculum. And it's
Yeah.
not because teachers don't want to do it, and it's not because students can't learn. It's
That's right.
because we haven't invested. And it's up to higher education, in my view, to make that connection,
Yes.
to really take down those walls.
Yes.
And, Lonnie Guinier had that great book a long time ago about the tyranny of the meritocracy. I mean, if
Mhm.
you start, and I would argue that what we're all doing is not any less meritorious, but
That's right.
but
That's
it's
right.
just taking into account the reality in which the talent pool is living.
Yes. Yes. And look, it's in so many aspects of the process. I think about extracurriculars.
Right.
We credit the student who's playing lacrosse
Right.
and his parent got them lacrosse lessons since they were 5. And the kid who's been working in their parents' bodega, running the bodega every weekend and every weeknight
Exactly.
throughout high school, we don't count that as a meaningful extracurricular in the same way as we count lacrosse. Well,
Exactly.
it's just locking in bias.
Exactly. I always use the analogy of, who's starting on third base. Yeah, they're going to get to home plate pretty quickly.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Who's starting on first base or below?
Yes. Yes.
They can get to home plate. We just got to get smooth
Yeah.
the
Let's, I'm sorry to interrupt. Let's move on to track 2. The much discussed issue of rising tuition and student debt. Student loan debt in the United States has gone above the $1.7 trillion number. It's amazing. About half of this is from students attending 2- and 4-year institutions. Debt and federal student loans cannot be discharged upon bankruptcy. Add to this the racial disparity in student debt. What do universities need to do to better address the cost concerns, and especially for economically disadvantaged students?
Well, I'll jump in, but I know John has done a lot of work on this, so I'll be quick. The first obvious thing in my view is really good financial aid, which has to be a joint operation between the feds, our states, and individual institutions.
That's
And
right.
we really need to take into account not only tuition aid, but non-tuition costs that really become problematic and become barriers for people and lead to debt. The second thing in my mind is that we have to really smooth the graduation pathways, but that means also thinking about the pathways between community colleges and 4-year institutions, for example, so that we can really lower the out-of-pocket costs right off the bat. So it's both investment in and smoothing the actual experience and how to do that. We have to think about debt relief programs, of course, as John tried to do and did do somewhat.
Yes. Yes.
So I'll turn that to you because that's your.
No, it's exactly right. Look, and I really appreciate the work the Biden administration is doing to accelerate debt relief. In some ways, I think of it as correcting a policy mistake of the last 40 years, because if you go back to 1980, the Pell Grant program accounted for about 80% of the costs of college. And now it's less than 30%. And so what happened in that 40-year period is we pushed the cost to students and families. And we've got to correct that. We can correct it for previous generations through debt relief, but going forward, we've got to correct it. And it's one of the reasons I think it's so important for the federal government to double the Pell Grant program, right? Because that would start to get us back towards where we were.
Absolutely.
And we need states to step up. We're fortunate in New York that the many governors and many legislatures have maintained a commitment to affordability. Our
Right.
tuition across our four-year institutions is just over $7,000 for
Right.
the year.
Yeah,
But that requires state commitment. And,
absolutely.
it's shocking, some states, how they have really starved their higher ed institutions of resources in a way that ultimately is going to undermine their economic development.
And it's ironic because all that it does is mean that universities go for out-of-state students and
Mhm.
students and
That's
give
right.
merit aid rather than financial aid,
That's
and
right.
all the things that we know will undermine the opportunity to really
Yes.
create a viable, college-educated, economically beneficial workforce.
Yes.
And yeah, New Jersey is doing, similar things to what New York is doing in terms of the Garden State Guarantee that,
Mhm.
smooths tuition lasting scholarships from 2-year to 4-year institutions. We've been doing this at Rutgers Newark for several years now, and it really enabled Newark residents to come in a way that they couldn't before. But, this has to be a real campaign. People have to see
Yes.
the reason behind it.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And look, the other thing, we talked earlier about the predatory for-profits, but there are a lot of institutions that are taking the federal money and they're not giving students anything.
Mm.
And that has to stop. And that's really a place where the federal government and states and accreditors have to get a lot more aggressive in saying, if you've got a program, students pay, hardly anybody graduates, the people who graduate don't get a job in the field. Why is that program able to continue to draw down federal resources?
I also am a big proponent of engaging the corporate world in helping with this process. So, in Newark, we have the Newark Anchor Collaborative of cultural institutions, higher ed institutions, hospitals, and all the big corporations from Prudential to Audible to PSE&G, and everybody is focused on the local talent pool and
Yes.
how can you invest in that. I like to call it stackable institutions. We're always thinking about stackable
I
credentials,
like that.
but what about stackable institutions?
Yes.
And,
Yes.
we've gotta all have an investment in it because that's the future workforce.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good business.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. One other thing in this area that I hope everyone who's listening will become an evangelist for is we've got to make sure that every young person completes the FAFSA.
Absolutely.
And we're trying.
That's a hard thing today, John.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But so essentially, last year in New York, students left $200 million on the table in unclaimed federal aid because of not completing the FAFSA.
Yeah.
So we're trying to persuade the legislature to adopt a universal FAFSA law in New York to say
Which we just
K-12
did in New Jersey.
is
But
right. Oh,
yeah,
I'm gonna tell legislators that. That's
Yep,
good
yep.
to know.
We got it first in the city of Newark, in Newark Public Schools, and then now it's in through the legislature. So
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
I did not know that. I'm
Yeah.
gonna make that point to our legislators. Yeah, but I think, saying K-12 has to work together with higher ed to make sure every family knows about the opportunity. And for undocumented students, then we have the DREAM Act in
and we
New
do
York.
too.
You have something
Yeah.
similar in New Jersey. But they should know that there are dollars out there for them.
Exactly. And then that requires a mobilization of communities as well. So for example, one of the things that we do with the Newark City of Learning Collaborative does Spanish translations and aid in all the public libraries for families coming in to do FAFSA completions. And
Yes.
we all know the FAFSA is not straightforward. Even
No.
as they are trying to simplify it, and I respect that hugely, but that's got to be part of what it becomes that you do.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
On to the next track 3, the value of college. In defining value, how important is preparedness for the workforce? What do universities need to do to meet these needs? as more alternative credentials and online offerings emerge, and are last mile solutions for job preparation, part of a university's role.
So I'll just jump quickly and then turn to you, Jim. But I am a big fan of a nonprofit called Braven. We work with them. Many institutions work with them.
Yeah.
I know, John, some of yours do as well. And Braven has done an amazing job of taking underrepresented low-income students in different institutions, like I'll just use ours as an example, but it's one of many, and creating a career accelerator course, which is an actual course. Our students now, all students in the sophomore year will be opting out. So they're all going to be signed up for it, and then they can opt out of it. And what they do is they get mid-career people from corporations, from cultural institutions, from nonprofits to work as mentors in the Career Accelerator. Students then get internships at a much higher rate. They graduate with about 20% higher likelihood of having a strong first job 6 months out or being in graduate school. The data are remarkable. I mean, much higher rates of income first job out than their parents, for example. And it really works. And it's an example of how we can stack institutions, how we can mobilize our communities to be partners in creating that last mile that you're talking about, Michael. I think it's absolutely critical.
Absolutely. If you ask parents and students when they're making that college decision, what they're hoping for, invariably, one of the things they talk about is some positive economic benefit, right? And you know, that's kind of a that's kind of a must-have for our institutions. You know, certainly in our community colleges, it's also folks who are working adults who are coming back and are coming to school because they want something that's going to enhance their competitiveness in the job market. So we offer the full range. I mean, you know, across the SUNY system, we've got one-year certificate programs. We've got over 600 micro-credential programs. We've got the associates, the bachelors, all manner of graduate schools. We got everything. We say there's a place for every New Yorker at SUNY. And, you know, one of the things we've got to work on, though, is making sure that in the programs that are not kind of obviously career aligned, we are still helping students find that internship, figure out a path. You know, because you want people to major in social sciences and the humanities, but they may need help thinking about, okay, this isn't like nursing. It's not automatic what I'm going to do next. So let me get some help figuring out what I like, what kinds of jobs are available, are a match for my skills. And so my goal is, ultimately, I would love to see every SUNY student, as part of their undergraduate experience, have a paid internship or experiential learning opportunity. And we're working, that's a big aspiration, but we're working towards that.
But that's so important. And I think the experiential opportunity is just as critical. If we can find ways to increase that, you know, when our supply chain students are out there creating sustainable packaging for Mars, it's a huge way to introduce them to a values-driven job. And I want to go back to your comments about humanities and social sciences. Being a social scientist, I really worry that we are getting narrow in the way in which we are going to think about appropriate avenues of work for a new diverse set of students. And it's got to be the case that graduate school, for example, can be something that a low-income student will aspire to.
Right, that's right.
And we need to make those pathways. The Mellon Foundation, for example, supported for us a humanities pathway in our honors learning community. And those students are now going on to graduate school. They would never have thought of that as the route that they would be taking. And they're phenomenal at it. So we have to think broadly in that.
Yes.
you know, by the same token, many of the fields that are the high return on investment fields are not fields that a diverse student body has thought they belonged in. So I'm sure you're doing this. We're doing a lot of work in data science to get our we work with Apple and with others to get our students to really see that as an opportunity
Yes.
for them.
Yes.
You know, in fintech, in financial technology, in some of the health fields that
Yes.
students might see as out of their orbit or unreachable. We need to
Yes.
really make sure that we smooth those connections.
That's right. And that includes having diverse faculty, right?
Yep.
So that
Absolutely.
students can see themselves represented in the faculty, and then identifying whether it's mentors for internships or folks who are providing in classroom learning opportunities. We've got to make sure that we bring into students' orbit folks who look like them, where they can say, oh, that could be me.
Right.
Right. And I worry that for some of our students, they just don't see that enough.
Totally agree.
Certainly in K-12, and then they don't realize that's an ambition that is available to them.
I totally agree. And you mentioned K-12, our urban ed program is just focusing intensely on producing the next bilingual set of faculty, for example. I mean,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
it's hugely important. Understanding what disability studies is, understanding the enormous contributions that individuals previously labeled as disabled can, in fact, contribute.
That's right.
You know, there's a world out there that are exclusionary, selective, narrow ways of viewing excellence.
Yes.
They need to be turned topsy-turvy.
Mm-hmm.
And the other piece is the soft skills that we know employers really want.
Yes.
They're so-called soft skills. I actually think they're the hardest skills, but you know, working in groups, working across language barriers, working with someone that's so different than you grew up with,
Yes.
understanding the world in a broad sense.
Yes. Yes. You know, in the midst of all the pushback against diversity, equity, inclusion, we say in New York, we're doing the opposite of that. We're doubling down on diversity, equity, inclusion, and we have a course requirement, a general education course requirement for all SUNY undergraduates, associates or bachelors. They have to do coursework that has content that grapples with issues of diversity, equity, inclusion. And you know, we've recruited a group of faculty fellows actually to support their colleagues in thinking about how to build these courses. But you know, if you're becoming a nurse, you ought to have an opportunity to think about racial health disparities or the role of language in people's ability to access healthcare. And it's essential actually to being good at your job to have that exposure. And so we think that's got to, again, be fundamental to what we're providing to our students.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. And it's true across a wide range of fields.
Yes.
People really, you know, narrowly think about that, but it's actually there's a broad range of fields in which you need to be culturally fluent. You need to understand the world. Man.
Yes.
You know, it's one of the reasons that I always push the arts, because artistic expression and narrative making, for example, is one of the best ways to have people understand the complexity of the world of other people. And if you're going to be in the health profession, you better understand that world.
Yeah, that's right.
If you're going to create the next generation of artificial intelligence tools, you better understand the biases that you have and that you're going to build in.
Yes, absolutely.
So I know the next, oh, I'm sorry, Nancy.
No, I was just going to say, if you're going to be in criminal justice, I mean,
absolutely.
You know, there's a perfect one.
So I know the next track is near and dear to Nancy, and it's not discussed enough, especially in these times, and that is track 4, preparing public citizens. So as we think about the value proposition of higher education, how can universities play a role in preparing students to be effective public citizens, addressing and pressing issues likely to shape their futures?
You go for it, John, because I could go on and on.
Oh, look, to me, this is fundamental to the mission of higher education. I'm a little biased. I started out as a high school social studies and civics teacher, so I'm very passionate about these subjects. Yeah, I think it's a few things. One, we've got to make sure that our classrooms are places that prepare students for civil discourse, to be critical thinkers, to look at problems from different perspectives, to try to be empathetic, and to try to think about what might this issue look like to someone whose views and experiences are different from my own. You know, my daughters in their high school have both had the experience of an assignment that I love, where as ninth graders, they write an essay on a controversial subject, taking one side. And then as 10th graders, they write the same essay, taking the opposite side.
Right.
And I think it's such a good exercise in just trying to reason through how might this issue look different to someone else. And so there's that work we have to do. I think there's work we have to do to help students understand, you know, foundational things about how democracy works. You know, that the goodness knows we need more people who understand how a bill becomes a law, more people who understand, you know, what are the kinds of things the city council does and how is that different from the state legislature or the federal government. And shame on us in K-12 and higher ed if we are producing folks who don't have that fundamental awareness of how government works. And then we've got to give students opportunities to participate. You know, I'm involved in an initiative called When We All Vote, which is about making sure that our campuses help students in a nonpartisan way get registered to vote, know when the election is happening, get informed, and participate as citizens in our democracy.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to put a special point on the notion of intergroup dialogue, the notion of conversations, and how we take for granted that we know who other people are. And in a society that is so divided and segregated in our own corners, that is so zero sum, into, you know, if I get it, you not going to get it. If you get it, I'm not going to get it. It is up to higher ed to understand how to really give the experience on the ground that actually makes empathy real. We can talk about empathy, but until you are on the ground in the community, engaged with a variety of people and their experiences, you really don't get in their head in a way that will make you able to reach across.
Yes.
And, you know, one of my favorite things that we have here is called The Newest Americans, a project on the narrative, the stories of the newest Americans. And we have a story bus that goes around to all the community, all the neighborhoods in Newark, collecting the stories of the newest Americans. It is life-changing to listen and really understand what another person's story is.
Yes.
And we cannot eschew that kind of intelligence, if you will.
Yeah.
And you know, we're not seeing that out there. We're seeing everybody be pit. You know, I go back to the Kerner Commission ages ago that said, you know, when you do better, I do better. When everybody does better, everybody does better.
That's right. That's right.
You know, we work on issues of digital equity and the digital divide, for example. That should unite a majority minority population in Newark with a majority white population in West Virginia.
That's right.
The issues are very similar. But until we get those experiences on the ground, we're not going to create
Yes,
public citizens.
that's right.
Mhm. And unfortunately, there isn't much emphasis always on creating good public citizens.
No, sadly, sadly. And look, this goes back to our earlier conversation too about admissions.
Right,
If, like some of our elite institutions in this country, you have more students from the top 1% than you have from the bottom 60%,
right,
you are not going to create a community where students really are speaking across difference.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
This is a very important subject, but let's, in recognition of time, let's move on to the next questions that have to do with degrees, credentials, and modalities. The national dropout rate in higher education over 6 years is around 40%. There's no real partial credit in the job market for incomplete degrees. It's up to students to transfer credits elsewhere to finish their degree. What do universities need to do to address the college completion crisis that disproportionately affects economically disadvantaged students?
Well, I would say something I said earlier today, and that is the notion of smoothing the graduation pathway. Really thinking about, for example, accelerator courses in the summer before students enter college, so that we get over this remedial attitude and we really think about how to position, how to fill the gaps that haven't been there in terms of K-12 curriculum. Think about programs that use predictive analytics. We're all talking about AI, etc. Let's use predictive analytics to smooth what the course pathways should be, to have advisors really, the way Georgia State did, the way we do, and I know SUNY does as well. We should think about re-enrollment campaigns. We're really hot on that, and I'm sure SUNY is as well. I mean, because, we have thousands of students with 60 credits, but no degree. You need to figure out, and we are trying to enroll those students, but to do that, you need to think about former debt that they have. Need to think about jobs that they're in. You need to think about a sort of care team that unpacks the kinds of issues around them.
Yes.
But that's a talent pool out there that really needs to finish.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be really critical.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. The one thing I would add that we're trying to do at SUNY is really to invest in completion. And so we are scaling up across 25 of our campuses a program called ACE or ASAP within the CUNY system. And this is a set of wraparound supports that's been shown in randomized controlled trials to double college completion.
Right.
And it's the kind of intensive advising you were describing. It's financial assistance, sometimes emergency financial assistance. The car broke down. If I don't have the money to fix the car, I can't get to work, I can't get to school, so I need that $200. It's transportation assistance. In New York City, they use Metro cards, and some of the other places the program has been implemented, they use gas cards, but the idea is, try to reduce transportation as a barrier. A cohort experience to really build a sense of community. So we're scaling that program. It costs a little more per student.
Yep.
But the idea is it's worth it because you actually end up spending less per graduate if you spend a little more